Welcome to another episode of Mentes Progresivas. I'm your host, Omar Prieto, and today I have a special guest, Dr. Andrew Walton. We're going to be talking about my favorite topic for me. It's creativity. And I talk about how important it is creativity as entrepreneurs, how it can help us, how it can support us, and sometimes how it can get us into trouble, right? Because for me, when it comes down to creativity, sometimes it gets me into situations that I'm like, I'm in this place already. Well, what am I going to do? This is what entrepreneurship is. But Dr. Andre, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking the opportunity to join us, and welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Omar. Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here. I really appreciate you inviting me.
Awesome, thank you. Well, I want to get it started because I've been studying your journey, and you have quite a bit of journey. And the amazing thing that is fascinating to me is you breathe entrepreneurship. You literally breathe entrepreneurship. But what I find it really interested too is the topic that you speak about it, how creativity has been the key element to pursue all the things that you have been doing and been doing for quite some time. So I want us to talk about a little bit of in that particular topic because I think it's really interesting. I'm just excited to hear all about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I can talk all day and all night about both entrepreneurship and creativity.
Yeah.
I say that there are three strands to my DNA: entrepreneurship and business, creativity, and coaching and teaching. Those are the three strands, and it's a wonderful time of my life. This because I'm able to actually bring all three of those together in a meaningful way.
Yeah. I'm I'm glad that you mentioned that those are your strengths because to me it's a key element of entrepreneurship, understanding what are your strengths, not just what are your values, but understanding your strengths. When it comes down to creativity, what what really inspired you to really dive deep into it?
Um, I didn't make a sort of conscious effort in the sense of walking along the edge of the dive board and then kind of diving in. Um, I've always been surrounded by creativity. Um, my father was a globally renowned artist, um, and my mother was a very, very good artist. She was the youngest student to be accepted in what was then Britain's number one university art course. And so it's just always been part of my DNA, really. In my early 20s, I started to invent things, um, even in terms of my work. At high school, I was doing all the sciences and all the math, and yet my first job out of high school was as a graphic artist for a publishing company. So I've sort of always been in that arena. So it's just always been a fascination for me, and not always a positive thing. I mean, when I was 7, my mother was taken away by an ominous black car with lots of ominous black suited people to a mental institution, a psychiatric hospital. And as a highly creative person, like the deaf and the blind, it's very easy to be ostracized. So creativity fascinates me from 2 points of view. One is the nature of creative people, highly creative people, as well as um, what creativity really is. And that's
Mm.
a critical part of the equation that it's taken me 20 years of research and thinking and watching to really figure out. And if I were on, if we had an audience for this show, and I were to say what is creativity, they would almost inevitably come out with the products of creativity. creative things like, the iPhone's creative, and, um, Andy Warhol's pictures were creative, and da da da, which doesn't tell you what it is. And the critical thing for me is that creativity is actually how you think. It's a means of thinking. And I think it's easy to prove that because a lot of people who have done something creative, like, for instance, in my 20s, I had invented 2 products, I patented those products. And then later in life, I created the theory of group affiliation of creativity. I designed my own home when I lived in Portugal. If you are creative, then you are creative. Period. It's not domain specific, and I think
Mhm.
that's really important. So, in terms of entrepreneurship, people will quite often have a high degree of creativity in the beginning of the entrepreneurial journey. And whether or not it's a unique product, it doesn't have to be. It can be a unique way of presenting the product. It can be unique aspects of a product, a unique approach to the market, all sorts of different things. But whatever it is, that will sometimes tend to flatline after a while. And that is in part because structure is being imposed on all those creative elements. It's important, I think, to realize that creativity is not only a way of thinking, but it's a way of thinking that is very intangible in some ways, and it's affected by everything in our life, how we think about even small things in our life. But it's a very important part of running a successful business. If you have a look at very big businesses, for instance, after 9/11, when the skies were closed for several days, and a lot of the big airlines were firing people, they were renegotiating union contracts, this was a real panic reaction. One large airline that didn't do that was Southwest.
Mm.
And within 10 days, they'd soaked up some of the routes that some of the other guys were getting rid of because, this was an excuse they used to slim everything down.
Yeah.
We're never going to fly again, so we've got to kind of cut all this stuff out. And Southwest didn't do that. They basically, within 10 days, they got a profit sharing system with their employees. They'd brought in new routes. They'd taken in, some of the cabin staff and pilots from other airlines. And you had a stark example of people who, on the one hand, were thinking in a knee-jerk fashion, like Delta and American and so forth. And then, on the other hand, you had a company that was prepared to sit back and say, okay, let's have a look at what's going on here. The government are going to give us a bailout. They're going to help us around this problem anyway. And so do we assume that, air traffic is going to always be dead, that nobody's going to be flying anymore? No, of course we're not. So they took that as an opportunity. So creativity in entrepreneurship is not just a function of new products, it's a function of every decision you make. And we humans are very lazy. We really, everything tries to happen in a way that is very minimal energy for what we do. We have all sorts of little subconscious tricks for trying to reserve our energy. And one of them is that we, as humans, we look back at some similar situation. We've got a decision to make. And, in the back of our minds, we look back at some time and ask ourselves the question, is this current situation similar to anything that we've done before? And if the answer is yes, then we will end up making a similar decision. We will gravitate towards what we did last time. And that is totally contrary to creativity. Creativity is exactly the opposite of that. Creativity is saying, let me have a look at this situation in a new light and have a look at all the various things that are going on in my world that have an impact on this decision-making process. And then you make a decision based on that. And so, that you can see quite clearly is what Southwest did. And it's what we need to hang on to if we as entrepreneurs are going to keep that spirit that keeps us at the top of the pile. It keeps us being innovative. It keeps us being competitive. And it keeps the whole thing being interesting.
Yes.
Burnout is what happens when you don't do that. When you go in every day and then gradually you make fewer and fewer novel decisions, the whole thing becomes not very exciting.
Yeah. This is excellent. Thank you so much for explaining it. That's a great example of how Southwest was able to think outside of the box in a
Yeah,
way. Just thinking
yeah,
outside the box and something new. You actually emphasize how important it is understanding the difference between system one and system two, what
yeah.
you're referring to. It's really crucial. And it's interesting to me how you're applying all this knowledge that you've been collecting, the data that you've been collecting as well over the years, and you just start applying it and you implementing it. And at the early stages, when it came down to you invented the microphone, right? When you invented the microphone, that particular part of, hold on one second, I see something, and you dive into it. It's it might be driving by your gut feeling, it might be driving by, it doesn't matter. It's just that curiosity inside of you that is always, it's being part of you. You always
Yeah.
curious. And me personally, it's amazing. At the same time, you mentioned the other part that I was speaking at the beginning. Is like sometimes it's gonna get you into trouble, and you're speaking about this part, and now you are working with individuals on that particular part, which it's the burnout.
Yes.
When an idea, it just doesn't get you the imagination that you have, the picture you have in your head, it just doesn't come out the way you want it. You go start diving into it, and all of a sudden, like, I'm burnout. So I want to speak about that because I think it's really interesting. I'm glad you mentioned it. To me, it's really interesting how we entrepreneurs, I always say, like, you got to go all in. And people have asked me, Omar, how come you don't get burnout? And it's a very very fine line. It's a very very fine line. If something goes wrong, I can go into that. But I always tell people, I'm like, it's getting to know myself better, understanding what inspire me, like you mentioned, what are the things that keeps the teams alive. That's what I'm focused on. I'm not focusing on,
Yeah.
like, am I gonna get burned out? I'm not. To me, that's, I'm not interested to that. I'm interested in
No.
the things that I really enjoy about doing everything. Besides, I know it's a lot of work, but that am I enjoying this? I'm always asking myself this question: am I really enjoying it? And I gotta say, like with this podcast, I'm really enjoying it. I know how much work I have to do. I know all the things that I had to do, but I'm having fun. And this is for me something that keeps me alive, like you mentioned. So I wanted to talk about a little bit of burnout because it's very interesting, though.
Yeah, it really is interesting. And, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about burnout. I think, if you kind of watch the Winter Olympics and you see those folks standing up there, there's a little traffic light, red or green, is it time to go? And, that they must be on the edge of excitement and terror, you know, and there are a lot of things like that. I think that are, there's a razor blade line between excitement and terror, and that's true of entrepreneurship. I think if you are prepared to take a risk, and I think anything that's exciting, it's difficult for me to see how that can really end up in burnout. You know, they burnout is a strange phenomenon and that the medical profession really is not interested in using that term. It's not a disease as they define a disease. As they come as close as they can to that by saying it's stress related, which is not terribly helpful, really. And I think the key to this is how you define stress. I would agree it's stress related. But stress, I think, can be defined a lot of different ways. I think if you define it as having a challenge for which you do not have the appropriate resources, then I would agree that burnout is that. Is it a function of stress as in, they're giving me too much work to do at work? Well, a number of my clients, I have asked them, if this is a stress-related problem, then what's changed in the last year, whereby you picked up the phone, you got on the email to get my services now? Why not a year ago? And for some of them, there is one specific instant that flipped them over the edge of that razor blade. And, but for most, there actually isn't. When you break it down, it's like, well, I had this much stress going on now and not so much. Well, I don't know. No, maybe there was as much. When you really dig into it, nothing much has changed. So what's happened between then and now? Well, a number of things. But what that tells me is that dismissing it as a stress-related illness is useless. You can say, okay, you've answered question number one, but that doesn't help me at all. So for me, burnout is a matter of balance. And it's a balance. You talked about excitement and curiosity. That's the creativity part of the equation. Creativity has at its core curiosity, which is why I'm pleased you mentioned that, previously. I mean, without curiosity, you really have no reason to exist in my book, but no reason to be creative. I mean, there's that spark just isn't there. So when it comes to burnout, if you've lost the balance, if you look at what happens to people when they've got burnout, typically their relationships start to take a downward turn at home with family. They start to alienate themselves from those very same people that could have a positive impact on them. They start to really become antagonistic at some of the people at work. Sleep becomes a real problem. I had burnout in my mid-30s, and I didn't go to bed. I mean, I just lay down on the couch, watched the TV until the screen went blank, got a few hours, and then took a shower and had to go into my own company, but nonetheless, being all kind of energetic and let's go, guys. Well, that was not an easy part to play in this particular play. But I think the other things, of course, that go with burnout are typically related to, well, I mean, there are physical things that go on as well as poor sleep. I mean, you've got all sorts of physical problems that come up. But I think my programs for burnout relate to reestablishing the balance of thinking. So introducing creativity into people's lives. And that has an incredible effect on burnout, because one of the things that it does is it gives people, if you start to get people to think with creativity, it gives them a new view of their life and the world. I mean, and it's a very different view. We live in a world that's incredibly deductive. Everything around us that's, TV advertisements that are scaring us and various other, it's all a very deductive process. And if you can switch that around and say, okay, we're going to look at things in a slightly different way, it's almost like taking the blinders off the racehorse, and you're giving people a new view of their lives and their work and everything around them. And the first positive thing that that does is that takes the hamster out of the hamster wheel. I mean, it
Okay.
stops them thinking the same things over and over again, because that's one of the characteristics of burnout.
Yeah.
You just, whatever you do, you keep, it's almost as a bungee cord, and it goes back to this same thinking pattern, which obviously relates to their stress, their burnout, the fact they don't want to get up in the morning, they don't even want to do this job, they wonder why they ever did it, and can they possibly sell the company, and blah, blah, blah. So getting them off that wheel and saying, okay, there is a big wide world out there, let's have a look at that. Let's have
Yeah.
a look at your future. There's all sorts of different ways that you can help people to do that. You can get them to make a dream board. Say, okay, you can't do this in the very early stages, but you move it on a little bit and you say, okay, let's create a dream board. This is what your future. How would you like your future to look? Let's take a step into the imagination of the future. What is it?
Yeah.
What can it do? And then you home it down to something that is really practical. I have a client who um, we managed to get it down to the fact that they wanted to retire to Costa Rica. And so, this board includes little bits of Costa Rica, a house that they happened to see for sale on the internet, little cafes at a place, a small village that they'd actually been to in Costa Rica. And this board came to life for them. And it did a whole range of different things, because there was nothing on this board that wasn't possible.
Yeah.
Everything on there was quite feasible. They if they got out of the situation they were in, they had the money to do it. Their family would have come with them, and all sorts. Everything was entirely possible. So by doing that, it broke all sorts of cycles that were going on in their mind. And more to the
Yeah.
point, it's a bit like kind of you've got the microscope and you just reduce the amount of amplification. I mean, you scan back.
Yeah.
So this is your world is not now your job. Your world is way back here, and you've got all
Yeah.
these other possibilities around you. So that's the key thing I think about introducing creative thinking, whether you're talking burnout, whether you're talking new products, whether you're talking expanding your business, all the time you're looking at things with creativity, you're able to see more options.
Yeah.
And just with burnout, some of those options may be entirely impractical. But as with brainstorming, for instance, we leave all the options on the table at first. Come
Yeah.
up with any old crazy idea to do this, that, or the other thing, and we leave it on the table until later. And then we introduce a filter that says, that's not practical. I want to get a new fast way of traveling to Australia. No, digging a hole straight through the middle of the earth, that is not practical. So we throw that out. So we have to think of other things. But that process of creative thinking um, introduces all these different options. And that is exciting. That's
Yeah.
exciting. And it invokes the curiosity that you were talking about.
Yeah. This is brilliant though, because you clearly have a very well understanding of human behavior and how the chemicals on the brain can be activated. Like that you involve endorphins, you involve how dopamine it can you can use it both ways, right? You can use it both ways.
Yeah.
Oxytocins, right? Oxytocin, how it can really not just help you as the person that is supporting your clients, but you actually getting those endorphins too, and oxytocin and all those chemicals, which is to me this is really fascinating because my brain just starts going off. Just the way you speak and you start going off. But I want to bring it back to the importance of visualization and setting up,
Yeah.
aiming to what you really want to see in the future. And
Yeah.
this is interesting enough to me because Anything and everything I'm doing now, I wrote it down 4 years ago. I completely wrote it down very detailed. And I'm always sharing this with my clients. And I say, like, I need you to write the goals in the present moment as you're already having it in the present moment. But at the same time, I need you to make it like a movie. I
Yeah.
dreamed about this. Anything you see in the background, I wrote it down. It might not be the same, but it's the closest thing that I was imagining. That I was like, just the creative thinking. I just let it flow. I imagine the smelling of it. I just imagine how the wood floor was going to be like. I want it to be wood floor. Now my house has a wood floor. I'm like, I wanted to have X, Y, and Z. It's just like a movie. I was just describing as a movie. I just let my imagination flow. To me, creativity is one of my, just like you, is one of my strengths. I just let it flow. I just let it flow. But the importance of visualization, it is key for entrepreneurship because we,
It really is. It
yeah,
really is
yeah,
absolutely key. And flow, of course, is interesting in the sense that one of the gurus of creativity was Csikszentmihalyi,
yeah,
and he really connected flow with creativity
yeah,
intimately. But there's another issue that I think relates to all this, and it's important in entrepreneurship and it's important in creativity. And that is this issue of fear. I was, I think every kind of cloudy patch in your life has a silver lining if you care
yeah,
to look for it. And that for me was the fact that when I was very young, I had very little in the way of adult supervision. My mother was a cook housekeeper for a very big house, and she was always doing something, always working. I mean, it was just nonstop. And so from the age I could toddle, I mean, I was just going wandering off somewhere and doing things. And as long as there weren't too many loud crashes, nobody, people just left me alone to do that. And, by the time I was sort of 4 and 5, I was just wandering into the woods and, exploring. They had quite a big stream there and, lots of holes where, animals would live and so on and so forth. So, one of the consequences of that was that things that were scary, you're walking down in the woods and there's a big hole there. Well, when you fall, it's like sort of what could be about to crawl out of that, That could be a sort of some really, well, of course, it never was. There was nothing crawling out of it because it was more scared of me than I would ever be scared of it. But the net consequence of that was I never really learnt to be scared of things because, the tiny little things you were scared of, suddenly you realize that you didn't need to be scared of them. So gradually, you progress and you evolve without that fear. And I think that was very, very useful to me. I mean, when I left the UK to come to the States and set up a subsidiary company,
yeah,
it was um, potentially a scary experience. I mean, it's literally, okay, so here I am now. What am I going to do? Well, at that time they had these strange things called newspapers. And you bought the newspaper and you found yourself a little office and you found yourself somewhere to live, and then you literally ask people, well, how do I set up a company in this state? And so I was in Nashville and the guy who rented me the office, he said, anything I can help you with? I said, yeah. How do I go about setting up a company? Oh, we'll just call this guy. He's my bookkeeper. He'll do that for you for just a few bucks. Suddenly, within literally a week, I've got an 800 number. I've got an office. I've got goods coming over to. So I mean, people thought I was crazy to even be doing this because my company was not that big in England. And they thought I was not completely, fruitcake. I mean, my accountant was saying, I think, Andre, this is a little premature to be thinking about things like that. And, my bank manager freaked out and thought, well, this is just not the right time. It really isn't. And, it was all rubbish. It was just, we got in there and it's been extremely successful. It built up quickly and blah, blah. But I think the issue of fear, obviously, without fear, you can do stupid things. But I think, not having a propensity to be scared of every little move really does open the door. And 99 times out of 100, what's on the other side of that door is nothing like as scary as you think it could have been. So that's the other component, I think. Doesn't mean you've got to sort of launch off and do stupid things, but it means that if there's a reason not to do something, that reason should not include the fact that you're scared of it. There must be logical reasons why, okay, this is not a good move because I've got this much debt and I can't afford to make this investment. And, that's a very reasonable thing. But to include in that the fact that this looks scary, so there's a lot of introspection has to go on there.
Yeah, definitely. This is amazing because it's really, really great to hear you speak about, in a way, it's what I call reverse engineering or reverse psychology. As you're pretty familiar with it. It's reverse psychology. It's how you trick the mind. How can you, instead of fear, you see an opportunity, you see an excitement. When I first heard this about reverse engineering, I'm like, well, this. It was new to me. So when I got introduced and started studying it, now when I went to psychology, started studying reverse psychology, I'm like, this is exciting. This is different. This is just different. How you can trick your mind, because just like you as a kid, you were introduced to that. You were like, hey, I'm busy. It's not that your mom didn't love you, didn't care. It has nothing to do with that. It's just the fact that she was doing something to provide for you, to provide for the family. And you were just like, hey, getting yourself into trouble sometimes, into difficult situations. And you're like, I cannot relate to it, to fear. Yes, fear can save us. Fear can help us. And you utilize it very well. The other thing that to me, it's fascinating because I heard Simon Sinek in one of his interviews. Simon Sinek is a very well-known person when it comes down to leadership. I heard him speak.
He's great.
He's brilliant. I heard him speak to a podcast, and the interviewers asked him, just like, Simon, do you get scared? And he's like, no, I get excited. And he says, it's like, I started studying this quite some time. And Simon says, I was watching the Olympics. He gave this particular story. It's like, I was watching the Olympics, and every single reporter, just like your story, you're saying the Olympics is a very defined lane of terror or really exciting. So he says, I was watching the Olympics in Brazil, and the reporter asked every single athlete the same stupid question. That's what Simon Sinek say. Simon Sinek has no filters. He just let it out. It's like he asked the same stupid question. Are you scared? Are you nervous? And every single athlete say, no, I am excited. And he's like, what I learned to that is that they've been trained their mind to get that particular nervous or feeling of afraid to excitement. And he's like, I'm actually now applying into my speaking. Every time before, when I used to go into speaking events, whether it was 5 people, 10 people, 100 people, hundreds of people will come backstage. It's like, how are you doing? I'm well. It's like, are you excited? Are you afraid? Are you nervous? It's like, yeah, I'm pretty nervous. It's like, now people is like, how are you feeling? I'm actually doing great. It's like, well, are you nervous? No, I'm actually really excited. And I was like, wow, will that work? And then I started applying on myself. So it really works. If all you say is just like, I'm actually really excited when I get into this podcast. I gotta get into flow. I'm like, I'm excited. I'm excited. And all of a sudden it's just like, boom, like I said, you activate certain chemicals so your brain you just like let it let it go. And it's to me it's fascinating the fact that you are very aware of that and you utilize all those particular things, not just with yourself, but you actually with your clients. And that's where
Yeah.
I wanna go into it now because you're not just an inventor. You're speaking. You're speaking nouns. You're a speaker. You actually create workshops. You handle, like I said, you breathe entrepreneurship. But one of the main things for me, I want you to tell us about a little bit of is you're actually a musician too.
Yes, I've really always been into music. I started learning the piano at like age 4, I think. And um, interesting factoid actually. If people that learn music at an early age, like 4, um, their corpus callosum joining, as you know, both halves of the brain,
Yeah.
actually is larger in size by the time they become an adult. So, in other words, the ability to think across all parts of the brain is actually increased, which I thought was very interesting. So, anyway, that was, and then I switched to the guitar, and then quite a bit later in life, I took up the saxophone and the flute, and I became a professional flute player. Um, and I had a jazz band when I lived in Portugal, and that was another example of flow for me because the wonderful thing about jazz is that you've got maybe sort of 70% of the time you've got to be playing um, with everybody else. I mean, you've got to be playing the right notes. You've got to be on, everything's got to be coordinated.
Yeah.
But then you get the time when it's your improvisation moment, and then you've got however many tens of bars it is to do your own thing, and there are certain rules, as you know, that you've got to kind of you can't go completely nuts with it. I mean, it's got to be fairly well within some sort of a structure. But basically, that to me, that's the time when it flows, if you like. My pianist and I got on incredibly well musically. I mean, it was just hand and glove. And though being able to just let go with an improvisation, neither of us, nobody in the band was allowed to have any music. Right? This is not dots on pages. This is about you communicating through your instrument. And when you think about switching from a structured tune, you're playing, you know, um, a piece of just a regular, well-known piece of jazz, and then it's time for your turn to break out into that. You've really got quite a significant cognitive shift going on.
Yeah.
You're going from really a partially kind of system one kind of thinking process where, it's pretty much part of your DNA playing, you know, um, whatever piece of music you're playing. And then when you go to, the improv section, I mean, you're really heavily into system two there. It's just like,
Yeah.
and no people, if you listen to, some of the greats, I mean, Coltrane or something, and you listen to 3 or 4 different cuts of a particular piece of music. One was live here, and one was live somewhere different. One was a studio, whatever. I mean, the improv bits are never the same. They're always totally different. They're dictated by what he's thinking right now. They're dictated by all sorts of different things. But so you've got this incredible ability, and the reason that it's important to me is that proves that you can switch from this system one thinking to system two thinking
Yeah.
consciously whenever you want to. So anybody that talks to me about, well, I'm not sure I can learn to think creatively. Okay, well, forget about the creative part at the moment. Let's at least get you to go from system one to system two. So it's when you go to, when you leave your house in the morning, take a different route to work, right? When you go to your favorite restaurant, pick up the menu, order something different. Don't have the chicken parmesan every time you go there. There's got a ton of stuff on there. They'll probably do an excellent job on all of those items on the menu. So that's the way you can kind of coax people to thinking creatively. But the analogy of the jazz to me is important because it shows people that you can do that. And if occasionally I've had very, very good classical people who wanted to join in with what we were doing with jazz, and it was always a nightmare. It's like, where's that piece of music with all the dots on it? They just have to have that piece of music with the dots on it. And I say, well, you haven't got it anymore. You're a much better musician than I am. Just pretend that piece of music's there. Okay, I'll do my best. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But that shift is it's not just, allegorical. It's a real cognitive shift. And if you can get people to make it, once again, going back to the burnout, this is what you're trying to do. But even then, even just people who want to become more innovative, let's say somebody's got a business and they want to introduce innovation into their business, this is the kind of process you're going to go through. You're going to this is not about the business. There is no business. Forget the business. This is about a set of individuals doing things. And so, this is the kind of process I go through to get them to think in different ways. And it doesn't take long to build up. And some of it, I think, is just allowing them to break the safety of making decisions in a cookie cutter way. Years and years and years ago, when IBM was still making computers for PCs, their advertising slogan was "Nobody ever got fired for buying IBM." And I thought, what a stunningly unimaginative way of introducing your product. But I sort of think of that in terms of, that's a reminder to me of the fact that, that something within the kind of working structure that we've created tends to make people think of this safety net. What can I do? I mean, there's no point in asking the CFO if they're interested in, the company's interested in taking over your invention. I know because I tried it before I went and became an entrepreneur myself. I hooked my inventions around to various different people. And the bottom line was, it became very obvious after a while, what's the safe decision here? Well, the safe decision is no. Of course it is. Do you want my new product? No. That means there's no risk, zero risk to making that decision. And so somehow, if people want to become innovative in their businesses, you have to break that cycle. You have that automatic knee-jerk, no, I don't think so. We're just staying within our core business. Thank you very much. Break that habit and get people to get outside that particular boundary.
Yeah, this is brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing. But to me, this is brilliant, and I'll tell you why. Number one, because I'm a musician myself, and you mentioned we've been on this mention of the flow, and I learn by just listening the chords of the guitar. For example, in this case, if you give me a piece of paper, to me it's like I have no idea. Give me the chords, and I just let it flow. And that's what sometimes I use in order for me to spike my creativity, because it gets me in that state of mind, that frequency that I'm trying to get. And sometimes it gets really hype, and I'm like, okay, this is it. I'm in flow. Let's go. Right? And I'm glad that you are using it, or at least you trying to implement it with your clients. You're trying to teach them and helping them understand their own process. How can you get out of your own perspective. I'm
Yeah.
oftentimes tell people, zoom out like a bird's eye view. Get out
Yeah.
of that perspective because that's just one perspective. But what
Yeah.
if you can get out? Now, what do you see?
Yeah.
It's completely different. You separate yourself from the situation, everything changes, and you
Yeah.
apply that particular creative thinking. How this is can create so many things, and as entrepreneurs, we often think that there's just one way to do certain things. This
Yeah.
particular podcast, this particular conversation that we're having, you bring in a topic to me and I'm like, wow, you're doing the same thing, but you using the language that you're using, that you've been applying. I'm like, oh, I relate to that. It's different. And this is the goal of this podcast because I don't want everybody to know that it's just one way, it's just my way. No, here's Andre. This is his way. It's different. And you might interact with it. Hey, just in this way, just like Nike said, just do it. Just give yourself permission. Give yourself
Yeah.
permission to go for it. It's scary. It's challenging. It's a lot of work. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, look, it's worth it because you're doing everything on your own, and more than anything, you're doing a lot of the things that you finally a lot of more purpose. And that to me, that's where I want to touch because you keep mentioning innovation. You keep mentioning because that's what it is. Entrepreneurship is innovation. You got to keep innovating. Right now, we're going into a new era or AI, where I never seen. I don't know about you. Yeah, I don't know about you, but when it comes down to technology, I never seen going this fast.
No.
And
No. It's
this
amazing.
is mind
Absolutely
blowing.
amazing.
This
Yeah.
is amazing. I mean, I remember back in the days, I used to have black and white TV, right? That's how I grew up, and you're very familiar with that. We grew up with there was no phones, no nothing. You know, now we have everything. Now look, this is how we're connecting. This is mind blowing. You're in a different side of the country. I'm over here
Yeah.
in the east, you're in the west side, and this is technology. It's helping us just to connect and becoming more, like a little more adaptable to the speed of technology.
I
How?
think
Yeah,
the internet challenges that in terms of speed, though, as well, doesn't it? I mean, if
yeah,
you have a think about, sometimes with my university students, I'd be sort of referring to a piece of marketing that I used to do or whatever else it was, and somebody would sort of say, "Well, why don't you just put that on your website?" You know, so I'm talking 1988. There was no website. I
exactly.
didn't even have a mobile phone. Jaw would drop. There
Yeah,
was life before the mobile phone. I mean, it was like, oh yeah, so, we used to wear sackcloth and had a little house in the trees, and I mean, it was completely gobsmacking to them that life existed at that point. But when you look at my dad was born in 1896,
wow,
and you're thinking that makes Andre about wow, about 100. That's ridiculous. Oh no, I could see that. Yeah, no, but when you think about putting together the book that I've just finished writing, just thinking about at that point where in his house he didn't have electricity when he was born, right?
yeah,
His first sight of an aircraft would have been he was just about of the age to fight in the First World War, and his first sight of an aircraft would have been one of the what they call the Flying Corps, which became the Royal Air Force, and they had the princely number of 5 airplanes, all built with wood and canvas. So I'm sure there wasn't five for very long. But
yeah,
just imagine the changes in his life. I mean, even by the time I was born, the TV in England had only just really become available. They made sure
Mm,
it was sort of available for the coronation of Queen Elizabeth. But
yeah.
it was, there's incredible changes that occurred just in one person's lifetime. And then, you look at the kind of way that that's going. I mean, it's almost inevitable that the next big change would be hugely swift and
Yeah.
very impactful. But if you have a look at, the Industrial Revolution, which was also a massive change incredibly
Yeah.
quickly. And what did you get? You got the Luddites, right? This group of bandits in England that went around, smashing steel bridges, and because they thought that everything to do with the Industrial Revolution was going to ruin the world,
Yeah.
their world in particular, but the world in general. You got the same thing with AI. For every person that says, "Wow, look at the impact this has had on my business," you've got 10 people saying, "This is the end of the world." I mean, for various reasons, war
Yeah.
is going to become too efficient. This is going to be fraud is going to go, the whole range. It's no different than the Industrial Revolution. I mean, it's this prediction of
Yeah.
complete disaster
Yeah.
and you can see that, that's just a macro version of what I was
Yeah.
talking about when you go and knock on the door of a CFO and say, "Do you want my invention?" It's the bottom line is the safe thing is to do nothing.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with AI, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just this incredible thing that, you can put your symptoms in a computer, you can tell a little bit about your past history. It's going to be an incredible invention when it comes to, the diagnosis of medical conditions.
Yeah.
We just have to know how to implement it. But so many different ways it can be, absolutely incredible. Yes, there's going to be some downsides to that we have to deal with, but it's going to be just an incredible development.
Yeah. This is this has been really amazing though. I'm so grateful that you're here with us. We've been all over the place talking about how innovation, entrepreneurship, curiosity, creativity, and the creative thinking. But I want to focus these last minutes of this particular podcast regarding the book that you've been taking obviously quite some time. You have spent 20 years though of studying. And to me, that's very remarkable. A lot of us are really afraid of just going all in and just one thing. And we want to see results really fast, especially with the speed of technology. We want to see if like it doesn't work, we gotta pivot. But you've been really, really patient about it. That's what fascinates me about you. You breathe entrepreneurship, but you really understand the long game, and that's what I call the infinite mindset, where it has no end. You have taken 20 years of your life studying this. I wanna I wanna ask you, why has been so important for you, and what does it mean those 20 years for you in this particular event, and obviously with this particular book that you is about to release pretty soon. But I want to hear more about that.
Um, it was well. It's really the first of three books, and I think this book is actually focused on coaching. It's helping. That's really become the focus of what I'm doing. It has been so powerful to me to introduce what I call spherical thinking into my coaching practice that this book is really tries to capture that. It does it in a necessarily rather long-winded kind of way because I need to convince people, firstly, that creativity is a serious topic. It's a serious, not just a serious topic, but it's a serious phenomenon. And so the first part of the book, I'm really demonstrating that creativity is the root of our social evolution. You know, apologies to any fundamentalists out there, but I think Charles Darwin did a pretty good roadmap of how we evolved physically. But we don't have the jet engine and the internet just because we've got opposable thumbs. That came from somewhere else. And, if you go back to some of the sort of cave paintings, even in southern Nevada here, you've got a map and you've got a hunter with, an animal, and you've got a river and you've got the sun for a bit of direction. This is pure creativity with a purpose. This is an innovation with the purpose being when this nomadic tribe gets back there next year, if our cartographer has not made it through the winter, they've got all the information they need. So creativity has been with us forever as a species, and it's still, as strong as it ever was. But it was also very strong then. I mean, you can see through history, it's just always existed. But it's also been with us all as human beings, as individuals. We were born with creativity because we weren't born with anything else. I mean, if you imagine that you've just come into this world and you're trying to make sense of the world around you, you've got no history, so you can't be deductive about it. You can't sort of think, okay, have I had this thought before? So this is what I do. No, because you haven't had the thought before. Everything is new. So we've always been creative. So the notion that gets crushed by socialization and so forth. So the beauty of all this is that people at some level that they don't recall, generally speaking, they have always thought in the way that I'm trying to help them think. So it comes naturally. And more to the point, once they realize what's happening, they generally embrace it. So you will see my clients go from burnout to a big fat smile on their face much, much quicker than with any process I've ever come across. And, it's scientifically, it's shown that creativity and happiness correlate.
Yeah.
And whether or not it's because when you're happy, you're more creative, or when you're being creative, you're happier, it doesn't really matter to me either way, but they correlate. So, but the critical thing is that you're actually tapping down on a crucial innate drive that human beings have to think to think like that. And so really you're just awakening what they already have. You're the catalyst.
Yeah.
You're not actually creating something new in them. You're just the catalyst that awakens that drive. And it's incredibly rewarding. And so that's what I hope I've captured in this book. That should be out within a couple of months now. It's all written. It's just, the cover and the sub-editing and blah, blah, blah. But that's really just looking at coaches. But I'm also working on a different, the same kind of material, but in a much more general, perhaps slightly more philosophical way. So it won't be aimed at coaches. It'll be aimed at really anybody that's interested.
Yeah. This is amazing. It's been really a pleasure to have you here. Congratulations on this particular new adventures that you have, new endeavors that you are embracing. And I have no doubt that they're going to make a huge impact, because it's, to me, this particular podcast, this particular hour that you've been spending with us, you have no idea how much you have inspired me. You have no idea how much you have touched in ways that I'm like, wow, this is fascinating. Because once we entrepreneurs, sometimes we get into this roller coaster that is just like, there's no one like me. There's no one else thinks about certain things that I'm thinking of. And here you are speaking in ways that I'm like, oh, I can relate to that. Well, I can relate to that. Not just the highs, but so is the downs. And to me, it's been really, really amazing to have you here in the podcast. But before we go, I just want to say thank you so much for taking the time to be here, Andre. It's been really amazing time. I learned so much. But before we go, I want to ask you, is there anything that I haven't been able or give you the opportunity to talk that you would like to share with the audience?
No, I don't think so, Omar. I really, really appreciate you having invited me on, and it's a pleasure, particularly, you know, your insightful questions, and the fact that we represent the two halves in the sense of psychology,
Yeah.
with your psychology training and my social psychology training. It's been a very rewarding time to talk to you, and I really appreciate your time and your insightful questions.
No, thank you. And honestly, this has been very powerful, and I hope you are watching and listening to this particular conversation. I mean, you've been inspired because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to just inspire each other. We're trying to support each other and trying to bring you guesses that is going to spike that creativity. It's going to spike that purpose within you. I'm glad that you mentioned purpose too, because of the inner strength that we have within ourselves. It's just that particular. It's just the purpose that why we're here. And I just got to say thank you so much from the bottom of my heart for being here. And I will definitely gonna have another conversation, but more specific in just creativity itself and burnout. Those particular two topics, because for me, it's it's fascinating as entrepreneurs. I think they are important. They are important, but they are part of entrepreneurship. And that's one thing that I want to mention. They are part of entrepreneurship. So if you're in the burnout phase, it's okay. It's part of it. If you're just in the creative side for the moment, enjoy it. Try to enjoy both because they go hand to hand. Like you mentioned, they enhance each other, right? They part of us. All those chemicals, all those experiences, all those emotions, feelings that we experience, they part of us. Don't try to push it down. Just learn how to process them, learn how to navigate, learn how to enjoy them in a way. For me, I enjoy them. Sometimes not very well. Sometimes it's just part of me. That's who I am. And accepting and move on. Look everything with a new perspective. Andre, it's been an amazing time. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Omar.